Okay.
Morning.
A very good morning to everyone. And on behalf of the organizing committee of Disputandum 2020, I'd like to take this occasion to welcome, first of all, Mr. Sehajveer Singh, who will be our moderation for the final session today. And then I'd go on to welcome Honorable Mr. Justice Amit Rawal, Honorable Mr. Justice Surinder Gupta, and Mr. Baldev Raj Mahajan, Advocate General Haryana. I thank you, sir, for taking out the time to come and join us to judge the final round of Disputandum 2020. And I wish everyone a very good luck. And now I'd like to request Mr. Sehajveer Singh to kindly begin the session.
Good morning, everybody. And I would like to, afternoon actually, I would like to welcome all of you to the finals of Disputandum 2020. I would also like to thank our honorable judges, Honorable Mr. Justice Rawal, Honorable Mr. Justice Surinder Gupta, and Mr. B.R. Mahajan, Learned Advocate General Haryana, for sparing your valuable time and agreeing to judge these finals. It means a lot to the young lawyers who are finalists here. And I would like to congratulate all the finalists for having made it thus far and wish you best of luck for the finals. Hope we have a good, informative and a clean debate. Mahajan sir, is everything all right?
Yes, everything.
Debating as a form of public discourse and discussion has existed for a very long time. There's evidence of debating being used in ancient Greece as well as in ancient India. Even in the modern times, public debating and discourse plays a big role. The US presidential debates, as we all know, are very important and interesting in the presidential elections. Even in India, debating and discussing things has really worked for us, especially in the parliament where stalwarts like Pandit Nehru and B.R. Ambedkar and even the former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee used debating and discourse to build the foundations of this great nation. As recently as well, you would all remember the great speech by Dr. Shashi Tharoor before the Oxford Union, which went viral. So debating and public discourse not only is informative, but also helps in building public opinion. Unfortunately, though, in today's times of 24/7 news channels and social media, we have forgotten how to debate and discuss, but we argue. There's a very thin line between debating and arguments. So I would urge all the finalists to leave the arguments for the courts and have a clean and informative debate today. Honorable judges, the topic for today is Uniform Civil Code or existing personal laws. This contest between the directive principles and part 3 of the Constitution has been going on for a very long time. It started in the debates of the Constituent Assembly and has still continued. And we hope to address some of those issues in the debate today. With your permission, may I open the debate?
Yes.
Now, I would like to, yes, sir.
I think Justice Rawal is muted. Okay.
Yes, now I'm okay.
I would like to go over the rules of the debate today. Every speaker will have 5 minutes to make an opening statement. Thereafter, the debate will be, the floor will be open. It's a 20-minute debate. And I would urge anybody who wants to speak when the debate is open to raise their hands, and I will come to you. Please, no interruptions. Any interruptions will not be tolerated. And I will give equal time to all speakers. And let's start the debate. Speaker 1.
Am I audible to everybody?
Yes.
Yeah. Might I at the outset say that it's a pleasure to appear once more.
But your half of the face is coming on screen. You can adjust the camera.
Sir, am I visible properly now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, put down.
Sir.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, I'm arguing for the proposition that the existing personal laws are deficient not only as a body of law, but also as a form of law. And there is a need for codification through a uniform civil code. Essentially, when I look at personal laws, I trace the history of personal laws to the ecclesiastical courts in Roman law, where it was understood that property rights, civil laws, criminal laws will be defined by the state, whereas matters of the family and faith will be relegated to your religion. That there to the colonial Indian history, in 1835, the Second Law Commission was set up to deal with the task of codification of Indian laws. Over there, we came up with the departure between customary personal law and other forms of law which are codified. And the view that was taken is that personal laws, Hindus and the Muslims should be left to their own religious practices. The British should not interfere in their codification. Now, that differentiation between law was continued even in the Indian Constitution, where essentially the Indian Constitution saw religion in two different parts. So religion as a private faith and worship saw itself under Article 5 and 26 of the Constitution, and other forms of religion which governed matters of customary law did not find the mention in the Constitution at all, except for Article 44 of the Constitution. Surprisingly, the issue came up before the Bombay High Court in Narsuppa Malli in 1951, where the Bombay High Court said that for the purposes of Article 13, customary law is not law as per Article 13, and therefore is not subject to a fundamental rights challenge. And has never been overwritten. That perhaps that is the only High Court judgment in a body of public law which is more seminal than any Supreme Court judgment. Now, I would use one judgment to discuss the problems with the existing personal laws, not as a body of law. I mean, it is a point not moot that every personal law has their own gender discriminatory practices. And the successes and failures of the Hindu code, the Parsi code, and the Christian codes are all testaments that codification is required to make a personal law more egalitarian and just. Now, I refer to the judgment of Shaira Bano versus Union of India, where we had 3 different judgments from among a bench of 5 judges, and all 3 judgments exemplify the 3 different perspectives that our judiciary has towards how we see customary law. Firstly, the judgment of Honorable Justice Kher, who was the Chief Justice, along with Nazir, and supplemented the view of the Narsuppa Malli judgment by saying that customary law is as important as fundamental rights. I am quoting the judgment verbatim here, where the law said that customary law has the same potential as fundamental rights for our constitution. If we juxtapose it to Keshavananda Bharati, we get a perspective that customary law perhaps is another tenet of the basic structure of our constitution, because fundamental right as a concept is already envisaged as a basic structure. Now, this is problematic for one simple reason. Customary law is not immune to a judicial process. Unless the law is codified by the parliament, the law operates unabashed. That position has been thrown out by the Bombay High Court and also by the Supreme Court, which is a very problematic situation when we talk about a country which believes in rule of law. Customary law has the right to lay down the positions of civil rights in a court of law. We can go in a civil court and sue for our matrimonial rights, yet those laws and those bodies of rules are not amenable to the principles of justice, the principles of equality that are enshrined in our constitution. Therefore, allowing personal laws to exist as they exist right now is perhaps to allow a certain body of rules to operate beyond the realm of rule of law. Because if something is not amenable to a judicial review, then it is very difficult to contend that that is within the body of rule of law. The second approach towards personal law was taken by Justice Kurian Joseph, which in my humble opinion was a slightly errant opinion, primarily because Justice Kurian Joseph is of the opinion that what is bad in theology is also bad in law. And he quotes that example, but that is a problem that the Supreme Court has already run into in the Shah Bano case in 1980s, where it has been very well laid down that a court of law is not an ecclesiastical court. The Supreme Court or any high court is no authority in interpreting what a religious text says, as much as it is not an authority on laying down the laws of motion. The court can only look at personal law as a matter of fact. That is the classical distinction between lex lata and lex ferenda. You can only look at law as it exists and not law as it should be. That is also the approach that the United States Supreme Court took in the famous case of Wisconsin versus Yoder, where the First Amendment right of freedom of religion was in contradistinction to the right to education of Amish children. And the United Court said that if the Amish religious practice is not for the Amish religious people to send their children to school, then the court cannot really classify it as an essential religious practice or a non-essential religious practice. Therefore, the entire tool of determining an essential religious practice and a non-essential religious practice for me is slightly misplaced. The third perspective was the perspective that was eulogized by Justice Nariman and Justice Lalit, where they said that because of the 1937 Shariat Application Act, the word talaq has been used. Therefore, that is the anchor point from which we can subject the practice of triple talaq to a fundamental right challenge. Now, that is slightly problematic also because the 1937 Shariat Act doesn't codify a practice. It is not a codificatory law. It is merely a recognitional law. So what the 1937 Shariat Application Act says is that the practice applicable among the Shariat Muslims is law prevalent for the purposes of civil law and matrimonial laws. Now, having laid down these three positions, what is perhaps beyond question is that there is a need to reform the body of law as it exists. That venture has been partially been successful when it comes to the Hindu Reform Court. But it has not really happened for a variety of other religious practices. Now, essentially, I do not blame the parliament per se for doing that because the parliament is supposed to be a populist body. That is how the parliament draws its moral legitimacy. Its moral legitimacy comes from the consent of the people, which for good or for bad is usually. Courts, on the other hand, draw their legitimacy from the correctness of their action and not from the popularity of their action. Therefore, with a heavy heart, I must say that the courts have somehow not rewritten the Narsu Appamali judgment, even in the Shaira Bano case, because the rest of the three judges do not discuss the case at all. In fact, it was extensively argued before the bench. I, as an intern, had the privilege of attending those proceedings, and it has nothing has been done about it. Now, another very interesting thing is that Uniform Civil Code is actually already existent in India. If we look at Goa, very interesting case and example is actually Goa. So Goa was earlier a Portuguese colony, and Portuguese had enacted a Portuguese Civil Code. Now, the Portuguese Civil Code still exists in Goa, subject to certain modifications through certain state amendments which have come into being. The effect of the same is that a Muslim man cannot marry twice in Goa.
No, you'll have to wrap up.
Yeah. Last point I'd like to contend is that when we talk about Uniform Civil Code, we must differentiate a Uniform Civil Code from a Universal Civil Code. And as Justice Romapal had once said in one of her interviews, a UCC did not mean everybody is to be washed away of their religious practice. It's only that we must bring uniformity within each religious practice by codifying their personal laws. So what is not controlled in the realm of uncontrolled must be brought in the realm of controlled and
Thank you, Srinath. Speaker number 2, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and a very good afternoon to the respected judges and all the ladies and gentlemen who are here to witness this debate today. So, let me begin by saying that I am speaking against the motion which implies that I'll be speaking, although in favor of existing personal laws. However, that's not also the case, which I'll be elaborating on in my further submission. And although I might be expected to give answer to the question that why am I vouching for the personal existing laws, but here I would like to, you all would like to pardon me because I am here to ask questions. I am here to ask questions as to what is this uniformity we are all talking about today. What is this sphere of uniformity? And what is this uniform code? How much of it do we already have and how much far further we really want to go? Also, the questions, very important questions in fact, like why is it opposed? And who will be deciding on to this uniformity if we go into the realm of drafting something like a UCC for us? So the aim here my aim here is not to convince you all that we need the existing personal laws. My aim here is to make my opponents question their rationality of asking for a uniform civil. In the process of doing that, my humble submissions would begin with first talking a bit about the constitutional realm of Article 44, which is here in question today. Uniform Civil Code. As we know, Article 44 falls into the Directive Principles of State Policy chapter, which means it is non-justiciable and can be fairly seen as a constitutional aim of the Constituent Assembly. However, we need to get into the details of it when it comes to its relationship with the other fundamental rights. So, there are two individualistic fundamental rights in which a great number of questions can be arisen in context of its relationship with UCC. First, freedom of religion, which is covered under Article 25 and also Article 26. The second, right to equality, which will be incorporating Article 14 and 15. For the first set of rights, that is freedom to religion, I would like to quote Dr. B.R. Ambedkar from the debate around the Hindu Code Bill. And he went on to say, and I quote, "The right of profession of a particular religion carries with it personal law of that person," which means he has directly linked any person's right to profess their religion with that person's right to profess and to be governed by their personal law, which means it is highly indicating the intricate relationship between the religion and personal rights. Second, the question here arises is that how do we evaluate and give more weightage? Who do we give more weightage to? If this right to freedom of religion on one hand and this Article 44 are clashing. As you know, there are so many religions and so many communities, sects, so much of diversity in terms of this subcontinent India. So where do we get those things to balance up? That's beginning of my series of questions I pose to everybody to ponder upon. Also, on the second point of discrimination. So this discrimination can be broadly classified into two sects. First, on the basis of religion, which will be covered by Article 14. However, there are several judgments which say that the treatment meted out to a Muslim man is legitimately different from that meted out to a Hindu man in terms of issues personal to them like polygamy or talaq. So this somehow rules out this question of discrimination on the basis of religion. However, we come to the second part of it, which is discrimination on the basis of sex, which is incorporated and prohibited for that matter under Article 50. And gender equality, and basically the ill that these personal laws are meting to the women's for that matter is a great debate. So this made us question, when we have strictly expressed individualistic freedom and the right to be not discriminated against on the basis of religion for that matter, why are women suffering, and will UCC be a cure to that suffering of women? That will be my second question in this point. I asked the last question in terms of the constitutionality and the realm of constitution around UCC. Should the nationalist sentiments of equality and uniformity, well, to put it a better way, be opted for even when they trample the rights of substantive equality guaranteed by the Constitution? Now, I would move on to debunk the two basic, as per what my research and all the people who are demanding for uniform civil code, their arguments of demanding it can basically be classified into two sections. First, that they're asking it for national integrity and for social justice, to say. And second, to tackle the gender discrimination that personal laws are having. So this basically makes, I will be making submissions refuting both these arguments in terms of the objectives they are sought to achieve in their march towards UCC. First, I would like to point out, to lay down my submissions in this context, that India is a very diverse country. Like I said previously, from various religions to sectoral, community and denominational differences, we are a country full and even proud of our diversity.
Sakshi, you need to wrap up. Your time is up.
Yes, sir. Also, in that context, I'm basically eager to ask that in middle of all this diversity, opposition to uniform civil code, though seems like a genuine concern, we need to see who will be taken care of and what parameters will be applied, what will be oppressed, and according to whom will it something will be oppressed. We have very diverse and actually not even so reconcilable customs and practices followed by different religions and communities. Best example in this case.
Thank you, Sakshi.
So I would just like to take one minute and just wrap it up in
You'll have enough time during the open debate. Let the other speakers also give
Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
Speaker number 3, please.
Good afternoon, everyone, honorable judges and the moderator. I will be speaking for the motion. In the year 1950, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru remarked that time was not right for India to adopt a uniform civil code. Uniform civil code has been the problem child of India because it asks the most difficult question, that is, what is to be given supremacy? Right to religious freedom or the principles of equality and non-discrimination? When this debate broke out in the Constituent Assembly, at that time, the Muslim members in the Constituent Assembly were all males. All of them except one fought to exclude the Muslim community from Uniform Civil Code. And on the other end of the spectrum were three women who wanted to make it a fundamental right. In the end, no one won. It was made a directive principle of state policy, thereby postponing the difficulty to be sorted by a future government. Now, 70 years have passed since Article 44 was enacted, and none of the successive governments have shown the gumption or the courage to act upon Article 44 of the Constitution. I strongly believe that today the time is right for India to enact a uniform civil code, and I club my arguments under 5 broad heads. Firstly, the religious aspect. Article 25 and 26 of the Constitution of India grant the citizens of India a fundamental right to practice their religion. However, this fundamental right is not absolute. It is subject to certain restrictions. Therefore, the questions such as what should be the line of succession, what should be the share a particular heir has to get, these questions should not be answered with respect to the scriptural injunctions, but they should be answered after the rational consideration, which is beyond Article 25 and 26 of the Constitution. In the year 1955, Hindu laws went through a major reform, despite the opposition by orthodox Hindu groups. At that time, Acharya Kripalani accused the then government of being communal on the ground that it laid down laws only for one community and not for the other. Today, I believe that Muslim law has to go through the same process of codification and reform because certain aspects of Muslim law are not in tandem with the basic structure of the Constitution and the spirit of the Indian Constitution. Now, coming to the second aspect, that is the gender equality aspect. Now, in 1955, Hindu women were granted equality to their male counterparts on the subjects of marriage, divorce, adoption, maintenance, and in 2006, they were also given the right of being a co-partner. Whereas on the other hand, Muslim women still face discrimination. It was only in 1985 when Muslim women's right to maintenance was recognized after the Shah Bano judgment. But thereafter, the government enacted the Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce Act 1986, which was a retrograde step because Section 4 of that act reduces the plight of a Muslim woman to that of a destitute person running pillar to post, finding her legal heirs and seeking compensation from them. And sadly, this section was upheld in the judgment of Daniel Latifi versus Union of India 2001. And up until recently, Muslim women were subject to the inhuman practice of triple talaq. So I insist that today, Muslim women are still facing discrimination in the matters of marriage, divorce, inheritance, and custody. Therefore, the demand of uniform civil code is actually a cry for gender just laws. Now, coming to the third aspect, that is the judicial aspect. Now, judiciary has since the beginning categorically stated in favor of uniform civil code that uniform civil code must come, and it has asked the government to work upon it to bring it into being. So right from 1985, the judgment of Shah Bano's case, same was retreated 10 years later in judgment of Sarla Mudgil, in that the Supreme Court asked the government through the Prime Minister to look into the act and secure a uniform civil code for the country. Then 2 years later, the Supreme Court had a change of heart. That was the case of Allahabad Women's Work Action Group versus Union of India, where the Supreme Court said that yes, the Uniform Civil Code is needed, but personal laws come under the ambit of state policy and the court cannot go into that. And the same line of thought was carried in Lily Thomas's judgment. But recently in 2019, Supreme Court again has went back to its original strain of thought, and the Supreme Court has chided the government for not enacting and acting upon Article 44 despite so many years of its being. This brings me to my fourth aspect, that is the word uniform in Uniform Civil Code. Professor S.P. Sathi says that the word uniform in Uniform Civil Code should not be construed to mean same law for all people, but it should be construed to mean similar law for all people, and similarity should be on the basis of equality and gender equality and non-discrimination. This is the perfect way to bring unity in diversity in India. And now my last aspect is the international aspect. Now, the outcry for Uniform Civil Code not only has been from within India, but also from outside India. India has ratified International Covenant of
Your
Civil...
time is over. Please wrap up.
Okay. India has ratified ICCPR, and that legally binds India to make laws which are not discriminatory to women and wrap up the existing laws which are. And I would like to conclude by quoting Justice Kuldeep Singh when he said that the government should now remove Article 44 from the cold storage and act upon it, and it should not be held in abeyance anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker number 4.
Please. Honorable judges, learned moderator, and dear friends, I hope we find each other in good health today. The issue of great importance, Uniform Civil Code, the issue which has been a very sensitive issue as far as our minority is concerned, people of different religion of our country are concerned. Now, to do justice to the stance and the perspective that I am given to defend today, which is to speak against the motion, to speak in favor of the personal laws and against the UCC, I would like to start at the birthplace of the idea as far as our country is concerned, that is the constitutional debates. The year is 1948, the month is December. The war is about to end. The country is relatively stable. The divisive elements have left for Pakistan. The countries are segregated. We have a constitutional assembly, which is the most trusted of our forefathers, more wise than all of us put together. And Article 44 is sought to be put in. The directive principles are taken from the Irish constitution, and now they are sought to be put in here. Where are they put in? If we go through the constitutional debates, what is the most interesting aspect of it is there is absolutely no discussion, no issue raised by anybody that today in 1948, we need the UCC today. And that was the best time because the constitution was coming into the being. The people of the India were being introduced with the gamut of laws which were going to be there in the next decade. This was a good time for personal laws as well. Not a single discussion by anybody, Hindu or Muslim. What is the discussion in the constitution debates, if you go through it, is that whether even the Article 44, which is put in the directive principles, which are not justiciable, even if that is to have a proviso to say the personal laws are accepted from it, that the people are not obliged. Nasiruddin Ahmed had introduced this proviso. Ultimately, B.R. Ambedkar, the motion was negative. They say if you introduce this proviso, it is as it is, it becomes infructuous, because that is the whole purpose of it. So personal laws cannot be taken out of it. Now, that is the one step that is taken towards the UCC by our Constitutional Assembly. After that, friends, there have been 10 steps which have been taken by the same Constitutional Assembly in the same constitution at the same time back from the UCC. I'll take 2 examples for paucity of time. My first main example is the introduction of Article 26, and where it has been introduced in the fundamental rights, whereas UCC has been left to be in the annals of Article 44 directive principles. What does Article 26 says? It says, subject to public order, morality and health, every religious denomination and any section thereof shall have the right to manage its own affairs in the matter of religion. So the widest amplitude has been given to the religion. It has been given the highest pedestal. It has been placed in the fundamental rights column. So whereas the UCC, which is not justiciable as per Article 37 in any part of the country, the fundamental rights have been put in the Article 26 has been put in Part 3, which is justiciable straight away by the Supreme Court of the country. That is the pedestal that this has been given. Now that is one. The final nail in the coffin for UCC, the final killer of the dream has been the fact that Supreme Court, as speaker number 1 has admitted, my friend, that Supreme Court has now called the fundamental rights the basic part of the Constitution, the basic structure of the Constitution. They are today, they cannot be taken away. The Article 26 stands to be embedded forever in it. The religious rights have to be given primacy, and Article 44, nobody has even touched it. Yes, it has been in the mainstream debates of the mainstream media for the last decade, but as far as our law is concerned, the religion is given primacy, and it is now the basic part of our Constitution. As long as the Constitution stands, as long as our country stands, it cannot be taken out of it. That is first. The second example is that we had introduced the concept of lists, the union list, the state list, the concurrent list. Now, if the framers truly wanted personal laws to be one day eroded away and UCC to come in, they should have put it in the union list, because you have to give it to one authority to make these laws. But what do? They put it in the concurrent list. So now not only is the personal law to be divided along the religious lines, it is allowed to be divided also along the state lines. And rightly so. We have the most diverse country in the world, a country of 136 crores as we stand today. The framers could see it. And more than 19,500 Aboriginal languages, the tribal people of Jharkhand and Santhal Paraganas are not going to be made to follow the laws of Bombay. It cannot happen in our country, and the framers were very conscious of this fact. Now, these are the two examples. Now we jump forward to 1985. The situation is that there's a lady, 62 years old lady, Shah Bano. She wants maintenance. She has been divorced by her husband at that point, a Muslim woman. She goes to the Supreme Court, says, I want the maintenance from my husband, Muhammad Ahmad. Supreme Court says, yes, you have to get the maintenance. It interprets Quran. It interprets section 125 CRPC. It says it has to go to the lady. Supreme Court, the most trusted institution, then more than today, has given such a recent judgment by Justice Chandrachud, 5 judges. And the most trusted institution, despite it being that law of a sundry maintenance law has not survived for a period of 1 year in our country. There were riots, national protests. In 1 year, the central government was coerced to bring in the law, 1986 Protection of Women, Muslim Women Rights Act, to undo the effect of the Supreme Court judgment. Ultimately, Supreme Court again interfered in Daniel Latifi. But
Can we wrap up, Nikhil?
Please. Now I fast forward to the present debate to say that whether the government of today is able to bring about this change, whether the present the most divisive of the decades that we have, the Muzaffarnagars are happening every day, the cow vigilantism, the Ayodhya disputes, the majority-minority divide is the biggest that it has ever been today. Whether this government can call itself the person who will bring in the UCC, it will be thought of as a euphemism for Hindu law. The last thing that I want to say is, amid the coronavirus pandemic, amid the fledgling economy, today is not the time to bring in the UCC. It will promote the social unrest, social instability, and not the Gandhian utopia.
Please.
Thank you.
Speaker number 5, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, honorable judges, Mr. Moderator, and my dear friends. I am Eklavya, speaker number 5, and the topic for discussion today is the Uniform Civil Code, or the existing personal laws. And I'm fervently here to support the making of such a uniform civil code. The preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states clearly that the recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. India, having ratified not only the UDHR, but also the ICCPR, CEDAW, and the Convention on the Rights of Child, therefore has a duty to ensure equal rights to all citizens of India, without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, religion, or any other status. The framers of our constitution wanted to establish a secular state, and for that purpose they codified Article 25, which guaranteed freedom of religion, conscience, and to profess, practice, and propagate their religion to all persons. But at the same time, they sought to distinguish between the essence of religion and other secular activities which might be associated with religious practices, but yet did not form a part of the core of the religion. And with this end in view, they inserted Article Clause 2A as thus: nothing in this article shall affect the operation of any existing law or prevent the state from making any law regulating or restricting any economic, financial, political, or other secular activities which may be associated with religious practices. At the same time, Article 44 of the Constitution specifically states that the state shall endeavor to provide for its citizens a uniform civil code throughout the territory of India. There are now many examples which can demonstrate the need of UCC. Discrimination exists in the personal laws of many religions and faiths, especially against women, when men are given preferential status in succession and inheritance. Article 51A enjoins every citizen to denounce practices derogatory to the dignity of women. It needs little argument to point out that a man marrying up to 4 wives or divorcing his wife by utterance of a word talaq thrice or refusal to maintain a divorced wife after a limited period are all practices derogatory to the dignity of a woman. Whether that provision of the Article 51A is enforceable in the court of law or not is a different question. But in other countries, such a person would have faced a jail sentence or even lost his citizenship. Minor girls as young as 12 are also victims of social and religious practices such as polygamy and nikah halala and other forms of contract marriage, namely nikah mukta and nikah mesar. This is why India urgently needs a uniform civil code in spirit of Article 44, read with Articles 14, 15 and 21 of the Constitution. While delivering a judgment legitimizing the Portuguese Civil Code of 1867, the Supreme Court reportedly described Goa as a shining example with a uniform civil code and said that the founders of the Constitution had hoped and expected a UCC for India, but the government had made no attempt yet. Under this code practice in Goa, a Muslim man whose marriage is registered in the state cannot practice polygamy. A married couple share property equally. Prenuptial agreements are the order of the day and the assets are divided equally between the man and woman on divorce. The demand of UCC is normally made by aggrieved women as a substitute for existing personal laws, as patriarchal, orthodox people still deem that reforms in personal laws will destroy their sanctity and oppose it profusely. Recently, as reported in 2019, prominent Muslim organization Bharatiya Muslim Mahila Andolan has expressed their willingness for the codification of Muslim laws and bringing the Uniform Civil Code. It declared that women feel that Parliament should pass a Muslim family law to enable women from the community to get protection in marriage at par with Hindu and Christian women who are protected by their respective family laws passed earlier. On the code, the NGO had said that the UCC is a question for the whole country to consider and not just Muslims. Any common civil law should uphold the principles of gender justice and equality. Even Parsis, for that matter, have several unjust practices which require to be dealt with. They can't legally adopt children, and if a woman marries outside the community, she is rendered an outcast. Levirate marriages is acceptable in Sikhism. The brother of a deceased man is obliged to marry his brother's widow, a practice it shares with the wider Jat community. The social transformation from diverse civil code to uniformity cannot happen overnight, and will of necessity have to be a gradual process. With that in mind, the government must adopt a piecemeal approach. Government could bring separate aspects such as marriage, adoption, succession, and maintenance into a uniform civil code in stages in the same way that they have recently outlawed triple talaq. However, even when the Constitution of India itself, which lies at the very heart of our nationhood, and the opinions of the Supreme Court, which I have already mentioned, espouse the cause of a uniform civil code, there can be but no doubt that the introduction of UCC is a long overdue imperative to bring about national integration and ensure that every single member of the society is guaranteed his or her constitutional rights based on the principles of equality, liberty, and justice. With that, I would like to end my speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Eklavya. You were on time.
Thank you.
Speaker number 6, please.
A very good afternoon, respected Honorable Justice Amit Rawal, Honorable Justice Surinder Gupta, Mr. Baldev Raj Mahajan, our moderator, my fellow colleagues, well today competitors. Diversity may be the hardest for a society to live with, and perhaps the most dangerous thing for a society to be without. William Sloane Coffin Jr. Right from the time the Constituent Assembly was drafting the Indian Constitution till our recent family social discussions, the Uniform Civil Code has always been a hot topic of discussion, which turns into a heated debate. My friend right before me spoke about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Subsequently in Article 18, the UDHR states everyone has a right to freedom of thought, conscience, religion. The right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, freedom either alone in a community, with others, or in public or in private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. What is the Uniform Civil Code? all sections of society, irrespective of their religion, shall be treated equally according to a national civil code, which will be applicable to all uniformly. They cover areas of marriage, divorce, maintenance, inheritance, adoption, succession of property. It's based on a premise that there is no connection between religion and law in modern civilization. A rosy picture? Well, not according to me. As Alahadi Krishna Swami said, it would be unwise to enact a uniform civil code, ignoring strong opposition from any community. The debate on the uniform civil code pre-colonial times, the Lex Loci report of 1840 stressed on the necessity of uniformity of codification of Indian law relating to crime, evidence, and contract, but also recommended that personal laws of Hindus and Muslims must be kept outside the codification. Well, even the Queen's proclamation promised non-interference in religious matters. Post-colonially, during the drafting of the Indian Constitution, prominent leaders pushed for a uniform civil code, but included it into the directive principles of state policy due to the opposition of various religious groups. Article 44 states the state shall endeavor to secure a citizen a uniform civil code throughout the territory of India. However, Article 37 makes it clear that directive principles of state policy are non-enforceable in any court of law. Article 44 uses the word states shall endeavor. Only the other articles in the directive principles use words such as in particular strive, shall in particular direct its policy, shall in objection of the state. Even Article 43 preceding 44 states that the state shall endeavor by suitable legislation missing in Article 44, therefore implying the state has a greater obligation in the other DPSPs than in Article 44. Why is the Uniform Civil Code not needed? In India, the laws are uniform in criminal matters and most civil matters. Indian Contract Act, Civil Procedure Code, Transfer of Property Act, Partnership Act. States have made hundreds of amendments. Therefore, even in certain matters, there is a diversity in secular civil law. Recently, several states refused to be governed by a Uniform Motor Vehicle Act. How is the UCC meant to be implemented? The framers of a constitution intended to have the Uniform Civil Code. They would have given it exclusive jurisdiction to the parliament by adding personal laws in the union list, not the concurrent list. In 2018, the Law Commission concluded the Uniform Civil Code is neither feasible, neither desirable, and secularism cannot contradict the plurality prevalent in India. It will rob India of its religious diversity. State action to introduce the Uniform Civil Code is against the quintessence of democracy. A secular state is, after all, an enabler of rights rather than an inhibitor of sensitive matters of religion and personal laws. When we talk about the Uniform Civil Code and religion, Article 25 lays down individuals' fundamental rights to religion. Article 26b upholds the right of religious denomination of any section thereof to manage its own affairs in matters of religion. Article 29 defines the right to conserve distinctive culture. Well, what do I personally have against the Uniform Civil Code? The task of actually devising a set of rules that will govern all communities is very formidable and tedious, considering the vast range of sentiments that have to be accounted for. It is merely a way of imposing the majority view on a minority with a lack of political sensitivity. Personal laws are derived from religious beliefs. It is prudent not to disturb them, as risks of endangering animosity and tensions between religions. India is a secular country which guarantees minorities the right to follow their own religion, culture, and customs. Under Article 29 and 30, the Uniform Civil Code shall contravene them.
Please wrap up.
Sure. Secularism in India is institutionalized religious domination, which is not the same as being anti-religious. It does not threaten religious identity, rather promotes it. And in the words of our Honorable Prime Minister, secularism is not only in our constitution, but also in our veins. We worship Mother Nature. We believe that the world is our family. Thank you.
Thank you. I thank the speakers for those enlightening opening statements. I would like to now throw open the debate. To my mind, there is a greater debate that needs to happen. There is a debate that needs to happen on religion and the conflict it has with secularism. Are we really a secular nation, or are we a nation that protects individual religions, irrespective of their vices on private individuals of those communities. I would like to give the floor to Srinath.
Let me begin with an example. I've lived a year in Cambridge. I've also lived a few months in DC. Surprisingly, England is not a secular state. It has a state religion. But if I'm honest, I believe that my religious freedoms are better protected in UK than they are in India. Primarily because at certain point of time, rights of religion are a matter of law and order more than they are about how you label a state. Israel, for an example, has a state religion, but it is very secular for a Hindu or for any other person. So therefore, merely labeling something as a secular and a non-secular state isn't as important as the law and order situation there. Now, I like to say one thing, that just because somebody is offended doesn't mean that they're right. Now, religion, for the purposes of our constitution, is clearly segmented into two parts, and let us not confuse between the two. 25 and 26 talk about faith, worship, your personal aspect of your faith, religion as a faith, not religion as civil law. 25 and 26 do not discuss religion as a civil law. That is Article 13, the term custom. And that was a debate in 1951 before the Bombay High Court, where the court said that, look, custom will not be interpreted to mean customary law. And that is where the problem begins. Because the constitutional framers were greater politicians and greater strategists than they were merely good lawyers. They said that because of a political reason, we cannot effect a UCC or any sort of codification. Mind you, the Hindu code failed in its first attempt. So what they did was they thought, we'll put the word custom in under Article 13. That will open up the fundamental rights challenge before the courts. And the court will be able to take those parts of customary law which are discriminatory and will be able to correct them.
Thank you, Srinath.
Yeah.
Imran, would you like to respond?
Sure. So when we talk about whether it's religion or secularism, as per the 42nd Amendment, the word secular was included in our preamble. In the S.R. Bomai versus Union of India case, the Supreme Court held that secularism is a basic feature of our constitution. When we consider religion, religion is something which is completely personal to each person who's following it. The state or anybody else has no, let's say, jurisdiction. They could, with a uniform civil code, maybe a uniform civil code could come up, but it would not be prudent in anyone's normal natural life to be governed by a set of laws which they've not been born into. When we talk about religion, it's a very highly debated topic in India, considering in the last few years, we've had a lot of increase in anti-religious or interpersonal religious disputes. But when we consider India, the basic fabric of India is secular. India is not a country in which the state is divorced from religion. We are a different definition of secular. India, if we have to make it in terms of religion, in terms of marriage, would be a country which has a polygamous relationship with multiple religions. Now, polygamy would not be in the context of marriage here. India protects the religious freedoms of each religion individually and not following one set of rules in which everyone is supposed to fit.
Can I give the floor to Surbhi, please?
Sure.
I would like to address certain comments made by speaker number 4. He said that fundamental rights are supreme and therefore Article 25 and 26 should be should have upper hand over the directive principle of Article 44. But then the question is, because fundamental rights are supreme, we also have fundamental right to not to be discriminated and fundamental right of equality in the Constitution, Article 14 and 15. Because these rights are supreme, that is why Muslim women's Article 14 and 15 cannot be violated, and therefore we need uniform civil code. And I want to state that Article 25 and 26, they begin with the wording subject to public order, morality, public health, and other provisions of this constitution. We have to keep this in mind. These Article 25 and 26 are not absolute, whereas there is no such wording in Article 14 and 15. That is unthinkable.
Nikhil, would you like to respond?
Yes, for a minute, I would respond to speaker number 3's contentions. Now, my friend has said that there are fundamental rights, equality and discrimination that have to be kept in mind. The first thing that I want to rebut is that the expression that my friend has read out of Article 25, subject to public order, morality, health, and to the other provisions of Constitution, only finds mention in Article 25, not Article 26. I had relied on Article 26 to say that there is a freedom to manage the affairs of a religion, which is given to a denomination. Religion religious denomination. It says subject to public order, morality, health, every religious denomination. It does not say any other part of the constitution. That is my entire contention. Now, this is one. Secondly, my friend has said, what about the fundamental rights of equality? And the learned moderator has also pointed out the vices. And it is a very valid argument to say that there are regressive anti-women practices in some religion. What do we do about that? If we don't bring about this, the UCC, then the personal laws prevail. These injustices continue to happen. Well, the answer to that is the concept of ironing out the creases. The ironing out the creases has to be done by the courts, which has been done time and again, and it should continue to go on.
Thank you. Unfortunately, the courts do not legislate. It is for the legislature to legislate and determine the laws that are then upheld by the Supreme Court or any court of this land. Therefore, to put the burden on the courts is against the separation of powers in the Constitution. So, would Sakshi like to say anything with regards to that?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for giving me the chance. So there is a line of argument presented by the people who are speaking for a uniform civil code, and many of them have used the example of Goa. Let me debunk this idea of idealistic Goa's uniform civil code and put it in front of you. First of all, Goa is made as some ideal solution that we have in one state and can have in throughout the country. But I present the problems which are there with the Goa Uniform Civil Code. Somebody said that in Goa, Muslims are not allowed to have polygamous marriages, which is a valid point. However, men are allowed to go for polygamous marriages. In terms of the registration of marriages, the process of Catholics and non-Catholics is different, which means that certain times what happens is,
I think Sakshi is having some connectivity issues. Can I ask Eklavya to take the floor?
Since we were talking about secularism and talking about fundamental rights and religion in general, I would like to add and substantiate what B.R. Ambedkar had also mentioned, because I believe one speaker Sakshi had pointed out. So while debating the issues in the Constituent Assembly, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar had himself opined that he did not understand why religion should be given this vast, expansive jurisdiction so as to prevent the legislature from encroaching upon that field, because we have the liberty to reform our social system, which is still full of inequities and discrimination, which conflict with our fundamental rights. It is by reason of this that why should you allow this interpretation of secularism to prevail in the conflict with such fundamental rights? In fact, severing religion from social institutions such as marriage, divorce, succession, etc., to secure fundamental human rights for all forms the essence of secularism in general.
That's easier said than done, Eklavya. Unfortunately or fortunately for us, as a pluralistic society, our religion and our morality has been linked from time immemorial. The pertinent question that needs to be answered, in my opinion, is who decides what religion or what practices will go into the Uniform Civil Code? How does one government or a group of people decide what is good for the entire nation when we are such a pluralistic society? Do we put the Nagas, who have various tribes, in the same under the same laws as we do citizens of, say, Chandigarh, who have completely different notions of what is morality and what is society? Srinath, would you like to answer?
Yes. I'd begin by saying that no proposition in law is an absolute proposition. Even the Constitution doesn't apply in toto to many tribal areas. Now, having said that, we must not force somebody into personal law where they find it difficult. There already exists the concept of a secular marriage. You have the Special Marriages Act, you can get married under it, and you can have your personal law governed through. But the larger pressing need of the society, like with domestic violence, is that there's a huge segment of population whose voices are underrepresented within their own communities. The unfortunate thing is that many women or smaller groups, family law is a larger group than married husband and wife. Their views, they are forced into a system against their will. And unfortunately, the political realm is governed by people who want the status quo to propagate. Therefore, I've always said that Uniform Civil Code is a necessity now because the courts have kept their hands off of reforming religious matters. Interestingly, even in the Justice Khair's judgment, where he says that, look, we will not interfere with customary law because we cannot, he still uses 142 to say, okay, this is an unjust practice for 6 months, we will allow it, not cooperate. Now, for me,
thank you, Srinath. Imran, that's a very pertinent point that Srinath has raised with regards to the ills in religion, and that is being faced by a lot of people who are forced into practices which may not necessarily be considered moral. Or so, would you like to respond?
First, I would like to respond to your part whether common personal law for if in any religious is common amongst all, not for the Hindus, not for the Muslims, and not for the Christians. In India, we have Portuguese and French legal traditions that are still operative in some parts. The Jammu Kashmir, the local Hindu law statutes are different from the central law statutes. The Sharia Act of 1937 was extended to the Jammu and Kashmir but repealed. Muslims of Kashmir are governed by customary law which is closer to Hindu law than to Muslim personal law in other parts of India. In the Northeast alone, there are 200 plus different tribes which have their own customary laws. The constitution itself protects these local customs of Nagaland, Meghalaya, and Mizoram. You know, the other thing, the ills of religion. There is one thing of interpreting the religion as it was meant to be. The other is a debate by news channels. When we talk about the triple talaq, the instant triple talaq is otherwise bad in Muslim law. But in view of politicizing the particular topic, it is made into a big Hewlett cry. The main triple talaq is a period of 3 months, where a period of iddat is to follow each time the word talaq is mentioned. But that will never come into mainstream politics because that is not what suits everyone. Now we have to understand.
Thank you, Imran. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The difficulty with the debate is that even if we do not want to, it unfortunately becomes about Muslims versus the rest. I would like to point out that the Uniform Civil Code is or the personal laws is not Muslims versus the other communities. There are enough customary laws in Hindus, and when I say Hindus, I encompass all the other religions which come within the definition of Hindus, which make that religion regressive for certain customs. Therefore,
absolutely,
we should remember that it is not Muslims versus the rest. It is about the Indian society, whether we need a uniform civil code or whether we need to codify the existing laws of those communities and make them more just.
Exactly. That's why I said that the Muslims in the Kashmiri region are closer. Their customary law is closer to the Hindu Kashmiri laws.
I've given the floor to Surbhi.
Sure.
Sir, I'd like to first address the first question that you posed, that who will decide the uniformity. In 1955, when the Hindu law was codified, a Hindu law committee was made. It was chaired by Mr. B.N. Rao, and certain opinions of practicing Hindus were also taken into consideration, and thereafter the codified law came into place. Now, I suggest that the same should be done with Muslim law as well. We need to take the participation of the Muslim board so that we can make a Muslim law which is acceptable to all. We can bring reforms in Muslim law which is acceptable to all the sections of society. And I also want to point out...
Thank you. Unfortunately, in India, we have the majority of the Muslims are Shias, but we also have a small minority of Sunni Muslims. Or I'm not sure I'm speaking.
I think it's vice versa.
Sir, I would also
we have more Sunni Muslims than Shia.
Yeah, so yes. the difference between the Muslims, the personal laws of both the sects is so wide that it is easier said than done to bring them.
And even between Sunnis, we have Hanbalis and we have the others which have the great.
Yes,
exactly this thing.
Now the first thing that I want to say here is that to address the point is that the UCC, as it is normally thought of, sadly, is not a press of a button. It is not a destination which magically arrives if we press a button. It is much more complicated. We need a widespread consensus, the adequate degree which was contemplated by the constitution framers at that time. The kind of atmosphere we have today, we say justice should not be done but should be seen to be done. I think the same maxim applies to good governance as well, that people should have faith in the government who is going to bell the cat, who is going to bring in the UCC, the kind of divisiveness that we have today, it is just not possible.
Thank you, Nikhil. I think it is the most overused adage that justice should not only be done, should be seen to be done, but the Supreme Court in number of judgments has now gone ahead and said that justice just needs to be done. Whether it's seen to be done or not is not the.
I think that maxim is more important.
Not the ambit of justice. Yes. Same, in my opinion, goes also for governance. We elect leaders to make choices for us. It is up to the collective conscience of the legislature to decide whether a law is good for the country or not. I do not think that public consensus should be the reason why laws should be enacted. If that was the reason, then we would have certain laws which would be quite unjust.
Learned moderator is absolutely right. Ideally, yes, but practically.
Nikhil, please, I would request you not to.
All right. Yes.
Eklavya.
Yeah, Mr. Moderator, if I'd like to add to what you were saying, and I think what was originally speaker number 6 mentioned about it, the fact that he said that there were several interpretations which are given within different religions for that matter. And for that reason, I think that the fact that if we're talking in terms of reforming the existing personal laws as an alternative to having a code in general for that matter, I think that comes at a very heavy cost. And for that matter, there is a myth of state neutrality whereby the leaders which we have elected, most often than not, they are pandering to religious leaders, and which suppresses the dissent which actually occurs in the society, due to which people and the interpretations which might be of certain religious segment, which might be more in consortium with the constitution.
Thank you, Eklavya. I would like to give Sakshi some time because she also got disconnected. Sakshi, please.
Thank you so much, sir. So I would pick up from the point of social consensus that you went.
Sakshi, you'll have to be slightly louder.
Okay, sir. Am I audible now?
Yes.
So picking up your point, the point you mentioned of social consensus, I fear that I disagree with what the opinion you had, that if I personally feel that there has to be a social consensus to get such a huge amount of change and something that is so close to people. And I would elaborate onto it by the means of several examples. For example, we have the recent instance of Sabarimala judgment. It was passed and made to be a law of the land. However, because people have been so unacceptable of that, it has not been implemented. We have several examples like something like untouchability, which has existed in our constitution for so long, but is still prevalent. And although I am not here to say that any of this is a bad law, all I want to say is the approach of getting the objectives which the governance of the state is demanding or seeking should be good and the correct way. And here I present my argument that UCC is not a way to get all the objectives. All, like I've previously also established, that the two line of arguments which stress onto why we need a UCC is for gender just laws. I see a lot of debate here happening, Muslim versus Hindu, like you also pointed out, and also about the rights of Muslim women, polygamy, nikah, and things far beyond that. However, I would like to point out a fact that it's not just Muslim women who are deprived, and this is all a political strategy and the way things have been presented to us. I present a different opinion. I present an opinion.
Thank you, Sakshi. Thank you, Sakshi.
Can I just add one line and just conclude it? That if I present a different opinion, that if we are able to establish and achieve our objectives of social justice and national integrity and gender just laws, other than by means of UCC, I think that will be a better approach, because the environment we have in this country today does not give sense of security to minorities.
It's a point well taken that the courts and pass judgments and give us laws. It is the will of the government that wishes whether to enforce it or not. The Sabarimala temple judgment, however just it may be, clearly to my mind, the will to enforce the judgment is certainly lacking. But so can the Uniform Civil Code can come because the consensus is there, or the government wants it to come. But would it actually benefit it? Would more laws not burden the courts more with fresh litigation? Can't we simply strengthen the laws that exist already?
Indeed, sir. On this very point, I would like to mention Law Commission's 2018 report, whereby they conducted a consultation process with more than 70,000 stakeholders.
Yes. Srinath, would you like to respond?
Yes. I mean, firstly, I'd like to caveat whatever I say by saying that I don't have experience in that matter. I mean, honorable judges will be able to tell better what is easier for them. What I do feel is that if there is a codification, then there is, to a judge's mind, in my humble assessment, to a judge's mind, it gives a sense of direction as to where equities should lie. Because in many cases, equities, for me, law operates as a principle of equity. All kinds of laws must be equitable, and that is also Articles 14 testing parameter. But between competing equities, the Parliament's discretion is to say that, look, we will choose this form of equity over the other. And that is what social justice is.
Thank you. Thank you, Srinath. Thank you. I would, though I'm not debating, but I would disagree with you on that, because the entire purpose of codification is to take out the equity. If we codify a law, then we take out the discretion of whether, as a judge, whether, to my mind, the equity should lie with A or whether it should lie with B. What do you have to say about that, Imran?
Well, equity, you have to see that there cannot be one plane judging everyone on the equal plane. If I am somebody who's 20 years old, I cannot be meant to compete with somebody who's 5 years of age. Now, on that note, when you understand that the Law Commission, as Sakshi referred to, concluded saying that the UCC is neither feasible, neither desirable. Now, that is only because of the fact that India is a country of many religions. Not even religions, customs, traditions vary according to the region you come from. So you cannot say that everyone, or there will be one standard set of procedure which everyone has to follow. After all, I have an individual identity.
Imran,
I've been brought. Yeah.
Thank you, Imran. But same can be said for our other laws. We have a civil procedure code. We have a criminal procedure code. We have the Motor Vehicles Act. We have so many laws which apply to the entire nation, and the codification of those laws are implemented throughout the nation, irrespective of religion. Some sects consider cannibalism a part of their culture, but we still prevent that from happening. Child marriage is another example. Dowry is another example. Therefore, religion and society can't be the crutch for people to discriminate and infringe upon the personal rights of people. What do you have to say?
That is why
Imran,
we are a country where, yeah.
Imran, the floor has been taken. Eklavya?
I thought that was a question to me.
What I would like to add about the fact that, since you mentioned, I think that the issue arising basically arises from the aspect of absolutism within each culture, which each culture and religion, which actually warrants attention. It is because of the fact that there is not adequate and no normative intra-cultural standard to gauge the legitimacy of the norm which exists between such practices. And people are just following them just because they've been handed down to them by their elders. So I think that is supposed to be a test.
Please, I would like to address the question raised by the learned moderator regarding the burden on the courts because of the various laws, personal laws, and UCC being the answer to that. I think it's a red herring argument. Now, what I want to point out is even today, without overstepping my boundaries, with all due respect, 400 out of the 1100 judges seats in high courts are vacant. From 1950 till today, there has been no point where less than 33% of the seats in the high court are vacant, 25% in the lower court.
Nikhil,
so that is the one which
you're digressing from the topic at hand. That's another debate altogether.
My point
the judges to litigant ratio is another debate, and we can have another 1 hour session on that. Yes. And I'm sure my Lord Justice Rahul and my Lord Justice Surinder Gupta will have something to say on that. But unfortunately, let's stay on topic. I would like to give Surabhi a chance to conclude. We're finishing.
Yes, sir. So I want to address the topic of judicial chaos that you mentioned, that so many adding another law above all these laws will lead to judicial chaos. But I want to say that right now we have so many, as you referred earlier, so many sects within the Muslim law. This is in fact causing a judicial chaos, and this problem arose in Sarla Mudgil's case, where it was hard to determine which law is going to be applied. Therefore, this problem will be solved with UCC. And so I also want to raise a point that the question was raised earlier regarding Muslim versus Hindus, and
Thank you. I would now like to give 1 minute to each speaker to conclude because we are out of time. So I would start with speaker number 1 and strictly 1 minute, please.
I think the proposition is very clear for me. There was a need to make all the laws just. Unfortunately, the constitutional framers left it per se to the courts because codification is a political process. The courts kept their hands off. Unfortunately, the ball has come back to the politicians in the parliament, and therefore we have no other option but to have codification, and codification which has to be uniform, and therefore a uniform civil code. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker number 2.
Sir, I would like to conclude by saying that painting all of us in red will be no solution. By say that by having a full knowledge, a full dedication to the cause, that we need improvements in personal laws and religious customary laws that we have today. However, I present another alternative option that UCC is no solution, and it will not even work for the cause of the betterment of the objectives we sought to achieve. What is needed is not UCC, but rather the courts that are civil, just, humane, and ensure the compatibility and uniformity with the constitutional ideas that we hold today as a constitutional
democracy. Thank you, Sakshi.
Thank you so much.
Speaker number 3.
So I want to say that UCC is essentially a gender issue. It is not a Muslim versus Hindu issue. It is an equality issue, and it is an issue of viewpoint regarding the progressive and the reactive parts of the society. That is the main issue, and we have to determine these issues and not digress to the wrong issues. In that, we lose the debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Nikhil?
Yes, I would say that bringing in UCC and encroaching upon the personal laws of so many people in this country is like taking a baby away from a mother's womb. It is not an easy job. The kind of consensus, the kind of wide cooperation that is needed from the political representatives is today missing. If it is done at the wrong time, it can bring about a social unrest and instability instead of the Gandhian utopia that it is expected to bring in. So there has to be a right time to do it. At that time is not today.
Thank you. Eklavya?
What I'd want to say is that the transformation of the diverse civil code to uniformity, it cannot obviously be taking place overnight. And there needs to be a piecemeal approach which needs to be adopted by the government, whereby as for the like of the triple talaq, wherein issues such as marriage, adoption, succession, and maintenance have been like at stall stages have been they put in maintenance as per in line with the constitutional for that matter, I would think.
Thank you. Imran?
India is a country which is rich in religious diversity. State action to introduce the UCC is against the basic concept of a democracy, the concept of a secular state. A state always has to be an enabler of rights rather than an inhibitor in sensitive matters of religion and personal laws. And personally, I would feel that politics bereft of religious teachings will always be dirty politics.
Thank you. Thank you, Imran. We've run out of time. I would only like to say that it's a debate that has kept many people awake for many a days together, it would seem. Theology, politics, pluralism, religion, secularism, these when combined together is not a happy recipe at all. And with that, we all have a lot of thinking to do, especially the politicians, the legislatures. The court, to my mind, has already shown us the way. Now it is up to us to determine which path to take, and so that our nation can progress, rather than having these petty fights over news channels on a daily basis. I think it's time that the government, having a majority that it does, should take a decision one way or the other, whether they want the Uniform Civil Code or they don't want the Uniform Civil Code. And that I leave to the wisdom of the legislature and for our speakers to debate in the future as well. With that, I'd like to hand over the floor to Shrey so that he can conclude the finals. And I would also, before I go, I would also like to thank everybody for their time, and specifically the judges who took out their valuable time and became a part of this final. Shrey?
A very good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Sahej sir, for yielding the floor to me. At the very outset, I would like to thank the honorable judges of Disputandum 20 who gave their time, valuable time to adjudge the participants and also share their wisdom on the niche topics. I would also like to thank all the moderators who, with their experience and sheer ability, steered the competition in the positive and the best direction. I also thank all the participants for the enthusiasm and their valuable opinions on the topics of public importance. A big shout out to my team who stood by me like pillars of strength and made sure that this competition was a roaring success. I would also like to thank our mentors, Mr. J.K. Goyal and Mr. Satej Narula, for their constant support, blessing, and guidance. In the end, I would like to thank all the sponsors for helping us reach out to this field. Cheers.
I would now request the judges to send their scores so that we can consolidate the scores and announce the winners. Since we have Mr. Narula and Mr. Goyal with us, I would also like to know of their views on this topic while we are waiting for the scores to be. Mr. Narula, can you hear us? Rahul, can you unmute Mr. Narula?
Yes, sir, I'm doing it.
As well as Mr. Goyal.
I have unmuted them from my side. They need to do it from their side.
So, Tetsa, you'll have to unmute. Yes. So, Tetsa?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Saj, thank you. And you've done a wonderful job today.
Since we are waiting for the judges, I thought we should have yours and your view on the topic as well.
Well, I do believe that we need to have a uniform civil code all over the country, and it should not be either region or religion based in any way.
That's a fair. I think it's irrespective of where we stand on the debate. I think it's high time that we take religion away from.
Definitely, it needs to be. Second. Why would you? Can we request the judges to put in their word?
Yes, we can.
Their views would be really helpful to everybody here on the.
My Lord Justice Raval is here. Other judges are there.
Justice Raval, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon, Satej. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, I can.
Satej, look, since I am on this site and still working, I would refrain myself to comment on it because it may have a far-reaching effect.
All right.
But I must admire that the teamwork Tishrei and everyone has put in with your good offices and your blessings. And all of the speakers were far excellent. Never think that you have lost or you have won. It is the last debate. It is always an aspiring for a participant to succeed and achieve some laurels. And in profession, I would like to say, in profession, there's such a big competition, but there's always a position at top. One must aspire to reach that position so that you can excel and you're over the top of the hill, so you can look down upon others, help them, encourage them, don't discriminate them.
Definitely. And I believe they all did a very good job. And it's going to be very difficult for the judges to differentiate and give marks.
Yes.
They were all very good.
All of them were
very well prepared and spoke very well. All of them.
Very, very good.
We must compliment them.
We must compliment them.
Absolutely. I think,
difficult job for the judges.
Yes, I think it's a very difficult job for the judges. I remember my debating days in college. We would have sleepless nights before preparing, and that is why in the later years of my debating, I started doing extempore debates because preparing was too difficult. I would just
extempore is always good. You should have an idea, read it, and speak whatever it comes to your mind. That's the best thing.
So Justice Surinder Gupta, some views from you. Let the judges come in.
Thank you. It's really a very healthy debate on a very important topic, and all the aspects were covered by the speaker. I congratulate them. It's a good debate. A distinction was tried to be made between the religion and civil code, which is the need to be understood. Whether there is discrimination as per the religion, I tell you, for example, even Hindus are not governed by the uniform civil code. We have Daya Bhaga, we have Mitaksha, we have some other branches, customs also. In Christian, once I was reading, a mother cannot get the right in the property of the deceased son. Here is these are to be removed. Not only, it's not a question of Hindu or Muslim or anything, we have to go to a wider aspect. Yes. And all the speakers have tried to cover it very nicely. And it was a very healthy and nice discussion. Enlightening one also.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir.
From the side of all speakers also, the Advocate General, Honorable Mr. Mahajan, why don't you put in a few words? Mr. Mahajan, can you hear me? Sahaj, can you request Mr. Mahajan?
Yes, Mr.
Yeah.
Mahajan.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. It was a good attempt. In fact, there can be difference of opinion with respect to the different points. The speaker has tried to be clear on all aspects. They have expressed independently their views. The uniformity cannot be there on a subject where the parliament till date for the last 70 years has not been able to reach to a uniformity. So it was a good attempt. It was in fact a source material for the parliamentarian also to think about it from our young generation which are coming forward and giving their view. In fact, their views have most important to make the view of the society also to come forward. So such, in fact, the discussion should continue and they should be enlightened. The society should also be enlightened on all aspects of the matter. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I think it's Mr. Mahajan is absolutely right. The consensus in that sense has to be made because we need to have a public discourse rather than have anchors shouting at each other and panelists on TV. We need to have intellectuals actually debating inside the parliament as well as outside the parliament and informing people of both sides of the argument. It is not a topic which is black and white. There is enough gray in it to give everybody sleepless nights. So I think debate and discourse is the only way forward rather than shouting matches and making it a contest between religions and showing what religion or making it about how one religion is better than the other. And like my Lord Justice Gupta pointed out, there are enough vices in all religions because unfortunately religion is more about interpretation by the clergy and the clergy interprets it the way it benefits them the most. So there's a lot of thinking that needs to be done on this topic, and I think that is why probably it's taken so long, and hopefully young parliamentarians will take the lead and maybe an issue will come out of it. The floor is open if any speaker also wants to give their view on after hearing the judges.
I mean, I just like to say that it's good to see the judges. After a long point of time, we don't really, the courts are not, it's good to make their acquaintance once more.
Thank you.
You know, I think India is beautiful because it has all of us. You know, for the past 1 year, it's a very difficult time for an Indian Muslim because you're often questioned, and with social media being so rampant, you're often questioned as to, you know, if you question something that if the government is doing something, you are supposed to be anti-national. Now, the first thing that a person who does not have proper research on the topic always says, go to Pakistan. What they don't understand is that an Indian Muslim who stayed back in India is the one who chose a secular, democratic India over a Muslim-dominated Pakistan. So when my forefathers took the decision then, that is the same decision I take now. Now we have to understand that sometimes discussions are important, but you have to understand that a lot of our generation doesn't want to step into politics. We want to be pilots, we want to be engineers, we want to do law, but none of us want to be politicians. And if the creamy layer does not think of getting into the politics, how are these reforms going to come about? If the UCC has to be implemented, it has to be implemented in a way that it is just for everyone. You know, everyone has to feel included. And it's not Hindu-Muslim at all. It's not Hindu-Muslim at all. But considering the circumstances that we're living in, everything becomes Hindu-Muslim. Even coronavirus becomes Hindu-Muslim.
I agree with you. I agree with you. You're accurate to say that the discourse needs to shift from anti-national, national, Hindu-Muslim to something more constructive, to something which helps people understand whether the Uniform Civil Code is required or whether it is not required. To my mind, in fact, as I'm not a very religious person, I'm maybe spiritual, I think religion should be personal, and the vices of society need to be rid from each religious practice. So as
100%.
We cannot
it has to be eradicated.
We cannot use the religion as a crutch to discriminate and especially with women, as we see. But that is true with most religions. There are enough practices in most religions. For example, in the Golden Temple, for a very long time, women were not able to operate as parties. And very recently, only women were allowed to go and do kirtan in the Golden Temple. So vices exist in all religions. It is us as a society to weed out the vice and use religion to better ourselves from within, rather than to make it a battleground in public.
True, absolutely.
Sorry, sir, Tetser, you were saying something?
I was just saying, I said religion is basically just a way of life. It's like saying my car is better than yours.
Yes.
We're not traveling to Delhi, we choose our own vehicle.
Absolutely.
And then we have the ego of having a bigger vehicle.
Absolutely.
So it's something like that.
Absolutely.
So one should not bother about the vehicle. You just have to see the destination. Destination for everybody is the same.
But sir, whereas we can choose our vehicle, we cannot choose the family or the religion we're born into.
That doesn't matter. You should just bother about the destination. That's all I'm saying.
Absolutely.
It's a vehicle you inherited. It's all right. How does it matter? Finally, you have to reach a particular place. Everybody has to go there.
It has to be something that's completely personal. It's to everyone with respect to their own religion.
Absolutely.
We have the scores. With the permission of the judges and Mr. Narula, may I declare the...
Please.
In third place, we have Surbi, who was speaker number 3.
Thank you, sir.
And in the first place, we have speaker number 1. Congratulations, Srinath. And speaker number 4 in the second place.
Congratulations.
So I'd like to congratulate all the winners. And thank you for participating, and thank you for giving us your time, and thank you judges for great insight, and thank you a lot. Your time is very valuable, we all know, and it's been a pleasure to moderate the debate. And I would also like to thank Shrey and the entire team of Disputandum for having me, and for doing a brilliant job organizing this and keeping us entertained as well as informed. Thank you, Shrey, and the team.
Thank you everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Have a good day ahead.
Bye-bye.
Congratulations, Srinath, and all the speakers. In fact, it's about getting to say, have your word. That's what us lawyers are anyways. We just like to have a platform to hear our own voices.
Thank you, Sahaj, and thank you, team.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
You all done a wonderful job. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
All the best, Srinath. Bye.
Sir, thank you so much.